Welcome to the Cute North Georgian podcast. I'm your host, Carly McCurry, senior editor of the Cute North Georgian magazine, here to celebrate everything that makes North Georgia unique and special. This is the podcast for North Georgians by North Georgians, where we shine a spotlight on small businesses, local events, and the fascinating people of our community. Whether you're looking for something new to discover or simply love supporting small businesses, you're in the right place. So let's dive into the best of North Georgia together. Today we're talking with Jim Betz.
Because it's just about Halloween, isn't it?
That's right, welcome. Jim Betz is a librarian by day and a ghost tour guide by night. And Jim has been a fixture in North Georgia for about 15 years or so, educating young minds in Banks County Primary School. But
Leopards.
as the sun sets, he leads ghost tours through Clarksville and Cornelia.
Yes.
And these aren't your typical ghost tours. So Jim carefully weaves together local history with eerie stories of spirits that still wander our towns.
Yes, and people ask me about that all the time because when I first started putting these together, my daughter said it would be very easy. She said all you have to do is walk around downtown and every time you get to an intersection, make something up. And I can tell you this, that not everything I tell you in a ghost tour is 100% true, but nothing, absolutely nothing is made up. Everything is either legitimate history, and there is a lot of legitimate history, but even the folktale stuff has either been told to me or I've read it somewhere. None of it is made up as I went through. It's all stuff that you might hear over a campfire or over at a sleepover somewhere.
All right, so I guess let's dive into your story a little bit. What inspired you to start leading ghost tours here in North Georgia?
Well, okay. I had some major changes in my life, and I decided I wanted to start a podcast. So I started a podcast because I had some questions about where I was living. I had moved here to Georgia. I've lived in a whole bunch of other places, and I never really looked into the history of where I was living. So I decided to do that here because this is so different from where I've lived up north and out west. I really wanted to get to know the place. So I started looking into stories and started looking into the history. And as you go, you start getting into the really interesting stuff. What was the question again?
What inspired you to start leading?
What inspired me? Okay. So one day, my daughter and I, we were in Dahlonega, and somebody said they were staying. We just overheard someone saying that they were going to the ghost tour. And I was like, the ghost tour. So we went to the office and I said, hey, I'm probably qualified to work for you folks. And they said, I don't know, you have to be a storyteller and you have to know local history. And I told them, I've been dragging my daughter around downtown, boring her with stories for the last hour and a half. And my daughter was like, yeah. So,
True.
yeah, I really thought about doing it, with this company in Dahlonega, but it's a long drive to Dahlonega. And then I thought, you know what, I could do it. I could do it right here. And so that's what I did. I decided to try it. And I've met some wonderful people. I've really learned a lot about the community. And it's been great. I've been doing it for about 3 years.
Awesome. So now you're not just telling ghost stories, right? We touched on this a little bit, but you're also sharing local history.
Yes.
How do you strike that balance between historical accuracy and the more chilling elements of a ghost tour?
Okay. There are ways of doing that. And the best example I can give you of that is when I first started my podcast, I didn't ask for money because I knew, let's face it, there's no point in doing that.
So that's a pretty saturated market.
It is, and for a 10-minute podcast, you're not going to ask for a lot of money. Moving Through Georgia, by the way, is the name of it. So one incident that came up, I did ask people to send in their ghost stories. And I had a fella send me a story. He worked at a place called Sharky's Bar. You heard of Sharky's Bar?
I haven't.
It has a bit of a reputation. It was in what is now the Mayor Green Plaza there, next to Your Pie and that cigar place. It used to be a fairly well-known establishment, the bar. Well, one of the fellas worked there. He told me that he used to walk ladies out to their car at closing time. and he heard a banging noise in the courthouse square. And he heard this several times. And one time he even actually called the police because he thought somebody was getting broken into. Well, so that was his story that he told me. Well, that fit in very much later with a story that I read. Now, in 1899, I want to say, but I don't have my notebook with me, so plus or minus 10 years. There were 3 men who were convicted of killing a federal marshal in Toccoa. Now, they were, even though the crime took place in Stevens County, they weren't held in Stevens County. And that is a really common thing because they would be afraid that locals might come into the jail and take matters into their own hands.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they didn't want to do that. So they were holding them in Habersham. But unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. Some people came to the jail. They confronted the sheriff, and the sheriff's name was Sheriff Ghastly, which is a great story for a ghost walk, and pushed past him and hammered open the bars of the cell, took the men out, and actually lynched them in what would be Pitts Park today.
But he's not a very good sheriff.
Well, these guys were going to hang one way or another. And in his defense, the newspaper says he tried his very best. Now, the newspaper says that there were 500 men in this group. But the newspaper always says there were 500 men. So we never know exactly how many men there were. But maybe that was one way of keeping face. You know, he could say, well, there were 500 of them. But that was where the whole thing really came together, where somebody's ghost story really dovetailed really nicely with a historical event right then and there. And the rest of it just grew out of that.
Mm-hmm. So Pitts Park, that's the one with the playground, right?
Yeah, the one that floods every time it rains.
Just checking. All right. Okay. So that sounds like a great blend. And I have to ask, do you have a favorite stop on the tour?
Well, okay, I'm a theater person. I love working with kids and working in the theater. I've done some productions in that theater. I mean, if you remember this face, okay, this face actually graced a lot of productions. Sometimes I was on stage for upwards of 3 or 4 minutes at a time. My daughter was very much a theater person, so she got involved with doing shows. And since I was driving her there anyway, I would just stay and get some bit part, you know, as part of the production.
Yeah.
And I love the culture of the theater. I love the traditions. I love the superstitions. There's just something I love about the theater. So our first stop is the theater. And we do talk about some superstitions. We talk about some ghosts. Every theater has its ghosts. That is probably, there are days that I'm tired. You know, it's been a long Friday. But I start talking about the theater and it just wakes me up. It's energizing. Absolutely kicks it. It's electric. It kicks everything off.
Absolutely. I can relate to that, although unfortunately I've only ever been cast in roles as narrators.
My daughter's been the narrator a couple times. I was in a couple of shows, and like I say, I mean, and that's one of the best things about theaters is that theater people tend to be very good at amusing themselves because you can be there for 4 or 5 hours, and really, even though you're only spending 30 seconds on stage.
Yeah, I know, and I think the only reason I've been cast as a narrator is because I can remember things and I'm loud. And yes. That's the essence of a narrator.
The world needs narrators too.
Absolutely. Once a little girl, a little fan in A Christmas Carol.
Nice.
It was a lot of fun. Back in the college days, of course. I haven't had as much time now, but I do hope, one day in the future get back into it. And I can see where you can definitely take a theater background and apply it into a ghost tour. And not just into a ghost tour, but you're an educator.
Yes. I do a lot of reading out loud. I do a lot of performative stuff. I believe, and one of the things that I try to tell my kids every year is there's many ways to tell a story. You can tell a story in a book. You can tell a story talking out loud. You can tell a story by speaking it. You can read out loud. Everybody has stories, and there's many ways to tell them. But podcasts, too. There's just so many ways to communicate in today's world. And everyone needs to be able to take advantage of that because communication is what makes us interesting people.
I agree with that. And for listeners who are kind of intrigued, but perhaps a bit hesitant about going on a ghost tour, can you describe what the experience is like and maybe rank the scariness based from like
It's not very
Coraline
scary.
to Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Yeah, no, it's not even Coraline. I mean, it's
Ghostbusters.
exactly. We walk around now. One thing that people get nervous about is walking. We don't go very far and we don't go very fast, and we stop and rest a lot. This is not now that this was a big sticking point when I got started. At the time when I first started talking to the town of Clarksville about doing ghost tours, the two things they were very concerned about was, number one, they didn't want people jumping out at you, which of course absolutely positively doesn't happen. And the second thing is people in Habersham County take their history very seriously, and they wanted everything treated with a level of respect.
Sure.
This is not sitting in the back of someone's hearse and looking at murder houses. This is legitimate history mixed with some fun, some folklore. So everything's treated very respectfully. It's probably, I would say, about 65% history, and the rest is maybe 20% just general folklore and a few ghost stories. So you can walk away from that. See, the whole idea of this and the whole idea of my podcast is for you to walk away from it with stories that you can share with people yourself. I always say the overarching aim of my podcast is to arm you with stories to tell in the car when you're bored. And it's the same thing with the podcast. If you're like me and your poor children are subjected to hearing stories of different places as you drive around, this is where you want to be, because you will be sitting in a restaurant one day and say, hey, by the way, you didn't know that this happened over here. And you will either be the most interesting person at the table, or they won't invite you out again. One of those two.
If you're lucky, they won't invite you out again.
Well, you could use it that way too if you wanted to. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you've now expanded from Clarksville into Cornelia.
Into Cornelia. We do Cornelia on Saturday nights.
And what are some of the stops in Cornelia?
Okay, well, Cornelia is a little different. Now, Clarksville, walking around Clarksville, there are many places where you can stop and say, this happened, and it happened here. This person was hanged here. This person was buried here. Cornelia is a little bit different. There are some things that happened on the streets of Cornelia, but there are a lot of stories that happened in the general vicinity. And that's so what I do with Cornelia is I move a little bit away from the supernatural, from the ghost stories, into something that people love, which is true crime. We talk about moonshine. We talk about romances going bad. A lot of history. You will walk away knowing who Cornelia was named after, but also a lot of moonshiners and true crime. We do a couple of we stack the bodies, as I say. We do a couple of murders every night.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, it sounds exciting. Well, as I understand it, you have some stories prepared for us today.
I do. I brought a story today that I don't do on either ghost tour, and I've never done this on the podcast, so this is just between you and Mr. Ellard here.
And the 40 people tuned in.
And the vast listening audience. All right, so Clarksville. Now, there's a jail in Clarksville. There's always been a jail in Clarksville. Now, let's say about 1870 or so, there was a problem. People were breaking out of jail. Now, if you look in newspapers from the 1800s, everybody's breaking out of jail. You'd never believe that anybody was even being kept for all the jailbreaks that go on. So, Habersham County decided to clamp down, and they decided they were going to make their jail more escape-proof. So money was allocated for it to refurbish the whole jail. But for some reason, we're not sure exactly why, only one cell was refurbished. So they had one modern steel-lined cell. Now, at one point in the late 1800s, there were 3 men inside that cell altogether. One of them was a fellow named Tillman Justice. Tillman Justice was from Towns County. He was, like I say, they would sometimes move people from other counties.
And what's funny is there was recently a jailbreak in Towns County.
Really?
Yes.
Well, there you go. Maybe it was one of his relatives. Tillman Justice was a moonshiner. And this is an endless story. We hear this all over the place. He had a dispute with his neighbor. His neighbor said, well, I'll just go to the revenuers and tell them that you're making whiskey. Tillman Justice got, that was a death sentence back in the 1800s.
Even now, you tell a drug dealer, I'm going to the police, and you're going to end up in a back of a car somewhere.
Yeah, dude, there were a lot of Miami Vice episodes like that. Needless to say, Justice killed his neighbor. He was tried and convicted, and he was going to be sent to Milledgeville to hang. For the moment, they were holding him in Habersham County. The other person in the cell was Bob Morris. Now, Bob Morris lived in Toccoa, and he was also being held. He had murdered his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law got into a fight with his sister. They were arguing. Bob Morris decided to end the argument by stepping out from behind a shed, holding a gun to his brother-in-law's head and killing him.
He definitely got the last word.
He got the last word. Absolutely. And there was a fellow named William Sisk. William Sisk, I don't know a lot about him. All I know is that he shot a fellow who was working on his shoes. The fellow gave him the bill, and Sisk shot him. There might have been more to that story, but if there is, I haven't found it.
Were they Nike Jordans?
They were probably really nice, like those with the NFT tags on them and stuff. And you mess that up, and they're gone, you know? So, 3 murderers, all in this new renovated cell. Well, a cell is only as good as its jailer. So, sure enough, one day, the jailer came to the door, opened the door to bring the men's lunch in. He brought in lunch. Bob Morris grabbed him, dragged him into the cell, beat him, took everything he had, including his gun. Jailers had guns back then, and ran for it. The New York Times says the 3 men came out, saw the mountains of Rabun County, and headed for them. Now, they're all going to get caught. So the question is, how would a failed jail attempt in Habersham County make the New York Times?
That was my question.
It's a good question. They got a posse together and searched the whole area. The first one captured was Bob Morris. He was hiding in a bush. One of the deputies came up on his horse, said, Bob, I can see you in the bush. He came out with the jailer's gun, took a couple shots. The deputy shot back and shot him in the leg. They threw him over the horse and took him back to jail. Tillman Justice wouldn't be captured for 3 more weeks. One day he was actually walking through Clarksville and asked somebody directions, and they said, hey, I know who you are. He said he wasn't. He said he was his identical twin brother, but they didn't fall for that for very long. He was recaptured. William Sisk was recaptured in Gainesville, and now Justice was hanged. Sisk was hanged. Bob Morris wasn't hanged. He was shot in the leg. They brought him back to the jail, and this was a good thing. He had only been out of jail for 6 weeks. Or, I'm sorry, did I say 6 weeks? I meant 6 hours. He had been out of jail for 6 hours, and that's important. And this is how a story makes the New York Times. Because the jail cell was so new, they only had 1 key to the cell. So the jailer they had pulled in was still locked up, and they didn't know how to get him out. So luckily, they caught Bob Morris, who had the jailer's gun, who also had the key.
Do we know if he was like a great-great-grandfather to Barney Fife?
Maybe. But gee, Andy, Otis just pulled me into the cell, you know. They didn't hang him. Gangrene set in, and he died a horrible death in the cell. But that's how local northern newspapers used to love running stories like that. If you read like the New York Times or papers from Philadelphia, they're full of stories about things like that happening in the South. The New York Times loved talking about Rabun County. You would think everybody in Rabun County was stealing horses and drinking liquor all day long. Now, not that I've seen a lot of evidence to the contrary, but I know that not everybody in Rabun County is doing it.
Some of us are drinking wine.
Or a nice,
Nice stout coffee.
a nice cup of coffee or a nice mixed drink, and then you go out and steal some horses.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Now, if you want to hear a ghost story, I was just thinking of a ghost story, and I would love to tell the story and say it was Mr. Ellard in the story and really just tie this all together.
Let's do it.
That would be great.
We're professionals.
I don't know. I don't want to make
Never exaggerate.
I don't want to make anybody mad. Okay. If you live in Habersham County, there are 2 or 3 stories you absolutely positively have to know. The stories that get told all the time. One of them is the story of Cannon Bridge Road. Have you ever driven? You know what I'm talking about? Cannon Bridge Road.
Is that the one with like the crying and the river? Okay.
Okay. What you're talking about is a crybaby bridge.
That one.
There are a lot of crybaby bridges in Northeast Georgia. Most covered bridges are crybaby bridges. There's a really famous one at the Stovall House out in Sawtee, Nakuchi. And that is usually a story of a woman drowning an infant involved in that. This doesn't involve drowning an infant, but there's probably a lot of stories, kind of like that song from the 70s when they saw Billy Joe McAllister throwing something off the Tallahatchie Bridge.
Yeah.
You don't know what I'm talking about.
But I was nodding really politely.
Yeah, ask your parents. They loved that song. All right. So, Cannon Bridge Road is the road that goes from Cornelia basically to Cleveland. It goes over the Chattahoochee River on a very tall concrete viaduct, and that bridge wasn't always there. The story is that once upon a time, there was a man and a woman walking across the bridge. They were a couple. They were very much in love, and they were married, just not to each other. And the man, who may or may not have been Mr. Ellard, but wasn't, was very financial wife. And she couldn't find out about the affair. She would divorce him and he would be poverty stricken. Terrible. So he had to break up the relationship. So that's what he did. He broke the news to his girlfriend and then told her that he had to make sure that she would never find out about it. And he knew how to do that. He pushed her off the bridge.
Yeah, that'll do it. That's pretty effective.
So the story is, if you stop and walk over the bridge, which you should never do because it's very narrow and people drive like maniacs over that bridge, and lean over, and you will hear her screaming in the darkness below, mostly in April. So sometimes in April, you will actually see people leaning over the bridge. Don't do it. It's very dangerous. But that's a story I tell on the Clarksville Ghost Tour. And then you asked me about my favorite part. This is my second favorite part, is somebody usually at that point will say, oh, I heard a story. I've heard the best ghost stories about Clarksville and Habersham County from people. And some of them I can repeat, and some of them, are great, but they're not repeatable. But that's the best part, is when you have a good crowd that brings their own history and they're not afraid to share it with the people in the group. That's when you just like, wow, this is a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. It's something like when you are telling a good story and people are leaned in and listening and riveted.
Yeah. And that's a very powerful force. I mean, there is nothing more powerful than saying to someone, hey, I have a ghost story. That gets everyone's attention right off. I should do that. I should do that like with math. I should be like, I have a good ghost story. There was a number 3, and somehow someone took out 2, and how much was left walking down. I don't know. Maybe we should teach that way. Maybe everybody would pay attention better.
It couldn't hurt. That's for sure.
Okay. Send your kids to school. We're not going to do that.
Yeah. Well, I teach history, so, probably wouldn't be teaching too much scary math stories anyway. Although from my perspective,
Where do you
they're all
teach history?
scary. Presently, I should say I have taught history. I'm taking a break from teaching and focusing on the Cute North Georgia magazine and raising my 1-year-old daughter.
That's a full-time job. I'm surprised you have time for anything else.
Yeah, me too.
Mine is fully grown and out of the house, and I'm tired.
Yeah, I'm sure. Does she go to the ghost tours?
Okay, we were talking about people jumping out. Now, my daughter, and this is exactly the thing she would do. She has always threatened that she was going to dress up like the figure in the park next to the Malden house and wait for the group to come by and jump out. Now, that's not going to happen because she's moved. She lives in Kansas now. So it's not going to happen. You guys are safe. But listen, if you want a really good idea for a Halloween prank, do it.
That would be incredible. And you'd have no liability in that. You would have no involvement in it. And you would still be keeping your promise to the city. So, if you wanted to attend one of these full ghost tours, how, where, and how can we pay?
Okay, it's $10 a person. We pay just before it starts. I don't sell tickets in advance. Cash, Venmo, credit card, Cash App. Friday nights we meet in Clarksville at the theater. Saturday nights we meet in Cornelia at the train station. At 7 o'clock, 7 p.m. 7 p.m. in Clarksville at the theater, 7 p.m. in Cornelia at the train station. And then on Sunday, 5:30 at the theater in Clarksville. That way it doesn't get dark. If you have little ones and you want to get them involved, make it a little easier on them and it doesn't get dark.
That sounds great. And you accept all forms of payment, Cash App, Venmo, credit card reader, cash, magic beans?
I'll take them if you got them, if they're worth it.
All right.
And this is important. I mean, this is a way to connect with your community. It's a way to connect with your community's past. Most of the people that I see on these ghost walks are not people that have lived here forever. They're people that have moved here and they want to learn about where they live. They want to learn about this community that they've moved into. But they're learning things that people who have lived here their whole lives may not know. And that's why it's important. If you want this community to be like this, if you want beautiful places like this that you can visit on evening and come visit Mr. Ellard, you need to be connected to your community. Now, we're about a week out from the storms. Things like this build a community, and when you build a community, it makes you want to help others in your community. So it's important, and think about bringing your kids, think about bringing your family, and just learning more about where you live.
Right, and as I walk this path with some regularity, especially during the fall, it's a meditative thing that I enjoy doing. And if you don't love your past, or if you're not connected to your history and your heritage, then you're not going to understand the importance of preserving a space like this. And places like this will get lost.
And they will get lost, and they do get lost, and that is absolutely true. And they are disappearing all over the place, and people try to fight it, but often, by the time they know that this is happening, it's too late. And that's why you want people to be hooked in with their community, with their past, so that things like this, they can be aware of what's happening around them, and be aware of when things like that are threatened.
That's right, and I think about the way that people interact, even with this space at Level Grove Cemetery. I've been walking here for a few years now, and there's really kind of three people in the community. There's the individuals that don't know it's here. There's individuals that come by and will lovingly lay some flowers at a historic grave, or put up a flag, or clean the graveyard. People that will put tender loving care toward individuals they've never met, they're not connected to in the least. And then there's those that will unfortunately leave their trash behind.
Well, there's always people like that.
That's right. Yeah. So there's three different ways to interact.
There are people who drop their trash and people who clean it up.
Absolutely.
And you should be one of the people that cleans it up.
And by being more connected with your community and your history and your past,
you'll want to. Yeah. Right. And your kids will want to.
Right. ready for our tea time feature of the Cute North Georgian podcast. We're going to start with the plum of the pickings. This one coming from Northeast Georgia. So all of us are familiar with the Aurora Borealis that took place not too long ago, as there were like 2 million photos on Facebook, 1 million probably from me. And most of us saw the Aurora Borealis, and we had a fairly traditional understanding of how it came to be. But some of us had some more irregular takes on what stimulated the Northern Lights. And this one especially caught my attention. It said, "You people are killing me," with the pics of the poison, parentheses, on top of the poison, laughing emoji, skull face in parentheses. This is caps lock, not in caps lock, the Northern Lights. It is legit HARP. Now, for a moment, I thought she misspelled AARP, but then I Googled what HAARP was. And it has nothing to do with the 55 plus club that gives you a discount at Golden Corral. It is a conspiracy theory that suggests that mind control and other elements are put into the atmosphere by the government, which the jig is up. You guys all know that the government is now creating instruments for depopulation and mind control, and I guess since you know that much, you should know the Cute North Georgian is also involved. So speaking of mind control, subscribe to the Cute North Georgian, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Facebook page, and Instagram page. Okay, so our next one comes from North Georgia instead of Northeast Georgia, and this one is from a DoorDasher. They write, "I'm just confused on where these new DoorDashers in Blairsville are coming from. I've never seen y'all's faces, but y'all are here all the time stealing everyone's money. I don't even make the money I used to because of you people," with I think it's an exasperated emoji. So my response to this anonymous member is, I agree. Why we need to pass some common sense DoorDash control. Why should these people from far-flung places like Habersham and Hogg County and White County be able to go into Union County, into Blairsville, and bring someone Sonic? I'm sorry, but if you are a Blairsville resident, it should be a Blairsville resident bringing you your 3 a.m. McDonald's. I agree. I think we definitely need to do something about these out-of-county DoorDashers. I'm with you. Now, our third post, this one was really cute. Okay, so there's nothing at all negative about this one. This one's just adorable. It says, "Anyone seen hummingbirds lately? Ours apparently have left. Update, had a visitor Wednesday at the feeder. Probably a passerby headed south. Please leave your feeders up." Guys, please leave your feeders up, because this gentleman wants to see some hummingbirds. And for that matter, I do too. Alright guys, well that is all I have for you this week. Take care. Bye.